Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Imagine a decorated American admiral, right? Renowned polar explorer, a name synonymous with pushing boundaries.
Richard E. Byrd.
Exactly, embarking on a mission to the ends of the Earth. But what if he didn't just explore to the poles, but beyond them?
Into a place supposedly within our own Earth.
Right, and he comes back with this story
Ah.
so astonishing, so utterly beyond belief, it challenges everything we thought we knew about our planet.
It really does sound like something from an old pulp magazine, doesn't it? A forgotten adventure tale.
Totally. Yet the stack of sources we're diving into today, well, it paints a really detailed, if fantastical, picture. We're talking a supposed lost diary, historical analyses, even other reports of strange polar phenomena.
And what's truly compelling here, I think, is how this single narrative, the one tied to Admiral Byrd, becomes this sort of nexus point.
A nexus. How so?
Well, it pulls together ancient myths about hidden worlds, very real Cold War anxieties, think nuclear fear, and of course the enduring mystery of UFOs.
Ah, okay. I see.
So our mission today really is to dig through these layers. We want to pull out the most compelling bits, look hard at the claims, and, help you separate the verifiable facts from, well, the whispers of fiction. Alluring whispers, though.
Absolutely. That's the core of today's deep dive. Admiral Byrd's alleged incredible journey into a hollow Earth and the wider theories it kicked off. Theories that maybe surprisingly still resonate.
They really do.
So get ready for some aha moments, maybe some wait what moments too, because this is where the story gets really, really interesting and maybe a little unsettling.
Definitely unsettling potential.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in the immediate aftermath of World War II. It's 1947, a year that would become, famous for UFO sightings.
It's the beginning of the modern UFO era, really.
Right. And Admiral Richard E. Byrd, already a global figure, pioneer, aviation expert, living legend, he says something cryptic
Well,
before another polar expedition.
what did he say?
He says, and this is apparently a direct quote from one source, "I long to see that land beyond the pole, that area in the center of the great unknown."
The great unknown. That's not your standard explorer talk, is it? Not just about mapping ice.
Not at all. It sounds much grander,
Yeah.
more philosophical, maybe even spiritual, like a quest, not just an expedition.
Yeah, to put that in context, it immediately signals something different. It suggests that, at least in his mind, or how these sources portray his mind, this wasn't just about science or charting ice. He seems to be consciously seeking something legendary, a hidden realm.
So it sets an extraordinary tone right from the start.
Absolutely. It implies this intent to go beyond the known geographical limits, into the mythical.
Right.
And we need to grasp that initial mindset, because it really lays the groundwork for the story that supposedly follows.
And what a story it is. The core of this legend, it comes from these purported diary entries, specifically dated February 19th, 1947.
Right, the Lost Diary.
Yeah. And the diary claims that after flying about 2,735 kilometers, that's roughly 1,700 miles, deep into what should be endless ice.
Just frozen wasteland.
Exactly. Byrd and his crew report seeing something absolutely astonishing. Not ice, not snow, but a vast green, ice-free valley.
Can you imagine the sheer cognitive dissonance?
I know, the shock, the disbelief, questioning everything you know about the poles.
And the striking thing about that description is just how radically it departs from known Antarctic geography.
Completely.
The diary paints this picture. It says the external temperature was an unbelievable 24 degrees Celsius. That's 74 Fahrenheit.
In Antarctica.
Right, and details like forest-covered mountains. And then maybe the most astounding detail, the sighting of a huge unknown animal, something that looked like a mammoth.
A mammoth, still alive.
Apparently. So this detailed picture of a vibrant, temperate, almost prehistoric ecosystem, supposedly thriving inside the frozen polar region.
Yeah.
That's the absolute cornerstone of the diary's claims.
It doesn't just challenge science, it sort of spits in its eye.
It's a direct defiance of our understanding of geography, climate, everything. The idea of this hidden, warm world with mammoths inside the ice, it's incredibly compelling because it's so impossible.
And the story just gets wilder from there. It escalates beyond just impossible landscapes.
Also,
The diary describes sighting a city, a shimmering metropolis, and then the plane itself suddenly feels light, unresponsive, like some invisible force took over.
okay, that's unnerving.
And then almost immediately, these disc-shaped, brightly lit aircraft appear, displaying markings described as swastika-like.
Whoa, hold on, swastika-like.
Yeah, that's what the diary claims. And these objects apparently took complete control of Byrd's plane, guided it
What's
down.
the tension in that cockpit? You can only imagine. Fear, bewilderment.
Must have been unbearable.
But that begs the question, right? The swastika symbol, that's
Christian,
jarring.
ew.
It instantly connects this narrative to some really controversial theories, especially those post-WWII ideas about secret Nazi bases, maybe Antarctic hideouts,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Right, the Neuschwabenland theories and things like that.
Exactly. And the fact that these objects have total control and a voice with a Nordic or Germanic accent
Hmm.
supposedly communicates with Byrd, well, that just adds layers of intrigue, specific unsettling details,
Takes it way beyond just exploration into something conspiratorial.
or even chilling for some people reading it.
And the communication wasn't just a quick hello. The diary says Byrd and his radio man were taken from their plane, not in a normal vehicle, but on some kind of wheelless platform.
A floating platform.
Seems like it. Transported towards this shimmering crystal city. It's described as pulsating with rainbow colors, glistening like crystal, like something out of, I don't know, Frank Lloyd Wright meets Buck Rogers.
Wow, that's quite the image.
The imagery is just so vivid, so elaborate, hard not to get drawn in.
It really is. That description paints a remarkably clear picture of some advanced civilization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Technology, architecture, way beyond human capability at the time.
Or even now, arguably.
True. The mention of crystals, rainbow hues, it creates this ethereal, almost utopian vibe. It sets the stage perfectly for the message Byrd supposedly receives.
A really striking contrast to the ice world outside.
Absolutely. Almost dreamlike.
And what a message it was. Byrd is apparently brought before the Master, a figure named Ariani, deep inside this inner world.
Ariani. Yeah.
And the Master reveals their civilization is thousands of years more advanced than ours. And they felt they had to intervene. Why? Because humanity detonated the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in '45.
Ah, the atomic connection.
Yes. He states very clearly, according to the diary, that atomic power is not for human hands. Paints them as almost watchful parents.
Yeah, and to put that in context, that fits perfectly with the post-WWII mood, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The new nuclear fear, the start of the UFO craze,
Mm-hmm.
the idea of a hidden superior civilization being worried about our destructive power. That's a really potent theme. It casts them as guardians, maybe overseers.
Concerned overseers.
It taps right into that universal fear born with the atomic age, that maybe we'd unleash something we couldn't control, something that could destroy us all. That collective anxiety was palpable then.
And the Master's warning gets even more dire. He talks about a coming great storm, a black fury descending on the surface world, leading to a new dark ages, much worse than anything before, unless humanity changes course drastically.
Wow, heavy stuff.
He explicitly says, no answer in your arms, meaning military power won't help, no safety in your science, so technology won't save us either. He suggests this storm might rage until every flower of your culture is trampled and everything is leveled in vast chaos.
Bleak. But was there any hope offered?
A glimmer. He says some would survive, and the treasures of human civilization would be safeguarded by them until humanity learned the futility of war and its strife.
And then they'd return.
Then they'd return to help rebuild, guide us. And Byrd's mission, very clearly stated, was to take this urgent message back to the surface world.
So, this prophecy, it's both a condemnation of our violence and a kind of cautious, conditional hope.
Seems that way.
It frames the inner Earth people not just as watchers, but maybe as potential saviors, waiting for us to grow up, basically.
Transcend our destructive nature.
Right. It's a classic trope, you know, enlightened beings trying to guide the less evolved, but updated with the very modern fear of atomic annihilation.
Feels like they have this disappointed belief in our potential despite our current mess.
Exactly. A deep, if maybe strained, faith that we could be better.
So, according to the diary, Byrd gets back fast, and the aftermath, immediate. Start. March 11, 1947, he attends a Pentagon meeting.
Okay.
The diary claims he reports everything. The discoveries, the Master's message, directly to high-ranking officials, and get this, to the president himself.
To the president. That's a big claim. So not just a routine debrief.
Definitely not. High stakes.
And the striking thing in the diary's account is the government's reaction. Swift and forceful.
How so?
Byrd was supposedly immediately detained. For over 6 hours, the diary even mentions a specific time, 6 hours and 39 minutes.
Wow, very specific.
And subjected to intense interrogation. Top security forces, a medical team, the works.
That level of scrutiny, It suggests they took it incredibly seriously.
Either for validation
Or
or,
suppression.
exactly, the intensity, the duration described. It hints they saw his claims as monumentally significant or dangerous
Mm.
to national security.
And the outcome of all this intense questioning, crystal clear, a strict gag order.
Silence.
Total silence. He was ordered to remain silent in regard to all that I have learned on the behalf of humanity, explicitly under national security provisions, reminded he was a military man, must obey.
And that imposition of secrecy and Byrd's obedience as a military man,
Hmm.
that's crucial to the power of this whole story.
It really is.
His final diary entries, supposedly from December 30th, 1956, years later, it reveals this internal struggle.
What does it say?
He acknowledges keeping the secret was completely against my values of moral right. But he holds on to this belief that as all truth shall, it will triumph, and so it shall. That's the only hope for mankind.
Powerful words.
And there's this passage, it's quite something. I have seen the truth, and it has quickened my spirit, and has set me free. I have done my duty toward the monstrous military-industrial complex. Now the long night begins to approach, but there shall be no end. Just as the long night of the Arctic ends, the brilliant sunshine of truth shall come again, and those who are of darkness shall fall in its light. For I have seen that land beyond the pole, that center of the great unknown.
Wow. That's intense. The monstrous military-industrial complex.
Yeah, it paints this picture of transformation, right? From dutiful officer to reluctant keeper of this profound, suppressed truth. It suggests the experience, real or alleged, had this immense life-altering impact. He carried it, believing it would eventually come out.
Okay, now let's pause the diary narrative for a second. Let's ground ourselves in the verifiable history of Admiral Richard E. Byrd.
Right, the established facts.
Because he was, without doubt, a titan of his time, pioneering naval officer, aviation expert, genuinely celebrated polar explorer, lived 1888 to 1957, his contributions are undeniable.
Absolutely. His official record is just immense, verifiable achievements, which is exactly why his name gave such weight to the later, more fantastic claims.
True.
He famously claimed the first flight over the North Pole in 1926, though, interestingly, his own diary, found later, suggested he might have turned back early due to an oil leak.
Oh, really? Another layer of intrigue there.
Yeah, but he definitively led the first flight over the South Pole in 1929. Undeniable. And he became the youngest rear admiral in Navy history at the time, age 41.
Impressive. And his Antarctic expeditions were groundbreaking, weren't they?
Hugely. The first one, 1928-30, mapped over 260,000 square miles. Used multiple ships, planes.
Then the second, 33-35, where he spent 5 months alone at that advanced weather station.
That's the one. Incredibly risky. His third, 39-41, was government-backed, mapped over 1,000 kilometers of coastline.
And they used aircraft, aerial photography, seismic surveys, established bases like Little America.
Right. First radio transmissions from Antarctica, first electricity with diesel generators. His work literally opened up the continent for serious exploration and science.
So the man knew his stuff. He was credible.
Undeniably. His official record is one of immense achievement, scientific rigor, leader, innovator, scientist. And it's this stark contrast, the proven credible explorer versus the fantastic claims of the alleged diary, that makes the whole story so darn compelling.
His credibility makes the outlandish claims harder to just dismiss outright for some people.
Exactly. His name commands respect in that field.
Okay, so we have Byrd, the verifiable hero explorer. But the diary's story, well, it hits some major snags when you compare it to his actual movements and the realities of polar exploration back then.
Big snag.
The diary says the 1947 flight started from an Arctic base station at the North Pole and flew northward.
Right. And that immediately raises red flags. Geographical impossibilities.
How so?
Well, first, in 1947, all historical records show Byrd leading Operation Highjump, which was massive, yes, but it was in Antarctica, the South Pole region.
Not the Arctic.
Not the Arctic. There was no established U.S. base at the North Pole then. The first big stations there came much later, mostly Soviet ones initially.
Yeah, it's a wrong pole.
Wrong pole. And second, even if he was at the North Pole, the only direction you can fly from the exact North Pole is south.
Ah, right, of course. Can't fly north from the North Pole.
Exactly. So the diary's basic geography is fundamentally at odds with known facts about where Byrd was and just basic polar geography. That's a huge point of contention.
And beyond the direction, what
Yeah.
about the distance? The diary claims a 3,700-kilometer flight. That's about 2,300 miles beyond the pole.
Yeah, the feasibility of that is another issue.
During high jump in Antarctica, they mainly used the Douglas DC-3, right? What was
Yeah.
its range?
About 2,400 kilometers, roughly 1,500 miles.
So not enough for a 3,700-kilometer round trip.
Not easily. Not without significant extra fuel modifications, which weren't documented for that kind of deep polar flight during high jump. They also had the PBM Mariner flying boat.
That had longer range, didn't it?
It did, about 4,800 kilometers. But it was a seaplane. Needed water.
Not ideal for landing deep inland on ice.
Precisely. It would have needed specialized ski modifications for snow or ice landings and takeoffs. And those weren't officially used during high jump for that kind of deep penetration flight from a land base.
So the logistics just don't seem to add up for a flight that far beyond the pole in 47.
It's highly problematic.
Yeah.
Even from McMurdo, the main base, which is still about 1,300 kilometers from the South Pole, flying another 550 kilometers beyond the pole and back would push the limits or require unconfirmed aircraft setups. Casts real doubt on the practical side of Diary's flight.
But here's a little wrinkle, a detail that proponents grab onto.
Oh.
The Diary's timeline. Takeoff between 6:00 and 7:00 a.m. First radio contact with the inner Earth voice at 11:35 a.m. That's, what, a bit over 5 hours flight time? Well, interestingly, that 5-ish hours lines up pretty well with the theoretical flight time for a 3,700-kilometer journey in a PBM Mariner, assuming it could manage it.
Huh. So is that just a coincidence? Or is it, a deliberate detail planted by whoever wrote the diary to make it sound more convincing?
Right. Adds to the mystery.
It's a very specific alignment, and it's worth mentioning. If the diary is somehow authentic, some argue the date itself might be wrong, misremembered, or maybe deliberately disguised.
How so?
Well, some sources suggest the flight might have happened later, maybe during Operation Deep Freeze in 1956.
Byrd was involved in that too, right?
He was. And by then, he was using longer-range aircraft, specifically the Douglas DC-6.
Dense range.
Much greater, over 7,300 kilometers. So a 3,700-kilometer flight would have been far more plausible technically with a DC-6 and 56.
So the date discrepancy, the aircraft capabilities,
Yeah.
it just adds another layer of what if to the whole thing.
Absolutely. Another fascinating puzzle piece in this very strange account.
Now, this alleged diary, despite all the questions around it, it didn't just magically appear in public consciousness. It was famously pushed, almost, well, maybe created for public consumption, by one specific person.
Ray Palmer.
Exactly. The hugely influential editor of Flying Saucers magazine, a publication that massively shaped early UFO lore.
He was so key they even called him the man who invented flying saucers.
Yeah.
Which is probably an overstatement, but shows his impact.
Definitely. And Palmer had a specific take on UFOs, didn't he?
He did. He leaned heavily towards an extraterrestrial origin, not aliens from space.
So from inside the Earth?
That was his angle. In his December 1959 issue, he claimed immense evidence that UFOs came from Earth's hollow interior through holes at the poles.
And others echoed this?
Oh, yeah. Writers like Theodore Fitch in Our Paradise Inside the Earth argued the same thing, that these beings were from inside Earth just pretending to be extraterrestrial.
And Palmer saw Byrd's story as proof.
As the cornerstone. He explicitly claimed Byrd had entered the inner Earth through polar openings. It was the perfect narrative for him. A credible witness, a respected explorer, seemingly validating his wild theory.
Gave it a huge boost in credibility, or at least visibility.
Absolutely. Palmer's role was crucial. He fused this respected explorer's narrative with a fringe theory, giving the Hollow Earth idea much wider popular exposure. And it provided a convenient home for UFOs and other weird phenomena.
It gave the theory a modern anchor point.
Precisely. By linking it to Byrd, regardless of the inaccuracies, and leveraging a public figure like that. It's a classic pattern we see in how these kinds of stories spread. It's more than just a weird historical footnote. It's kind of a blueprint.
And we should remember, the Hollow Earth idea itself wasn't Palmer's invention. It's got this surprisingly long history, even involving some serious thinkers.
Right, it goes way back. We're talking figures like Sir Edmund Halley.
The comet guy.
The very same 17th century astronomer. And Athanasius Kircher, another 17th century scholar, a German Jesuit polymath. Both seriously proposed hollow Earth models.
Wow. Halley and Kircher, that's unexpected.
It is striking, isn't it, how these major scientific figures, using the knowledge of their time, entertained ideas we'd now call pseudoscience. Halley thought Earth had nested spheres inside, maybe luminous, explaining the aurora borealis.
And Kircher.
Kircher, famous for his detailed maps and studies of everything from geology to Egyptology, he depicted this complex underground world, Fire channels, water channels, all interconnected.
So it shows this long-standing human curiosity about what's beneath us.
A deep fascination with hidden realms, even among brilliant minds. Before seismology gave us a clearer picture, speculation could run wild.
And it's not just European scholars. The idea echoes in ancient myths all over the world, right? Like a shared human archetype.
Absolutely, you find variations everywhere. Eskimo legends, for example, talk about a northern paradise, land of eternal light, temperate climate, big lakes, even tropical animals, long-lived people.
Sounds like the diary description almost.
Very similar motifs. Then you have Irish myths of a land far north, eternal sun, eternal summer.
What about other cultures?
Japanese symbolism depicts paradise as both on top of the globe and in the center of the earth, maybe a mythical island. Chinese cosmology describes an earthly paradise under the celestial palace of their supreme god.
So these parallels across cultures, they suggest something deep-seated.
Seems like it. A deeply ingrained fascination with hidden realms, sometimes idyllic, sometimes scary beneath or within our own world. Almost like humanity independently dreamt up this idea of a secret, maybe better world as a counterpoint to the surface.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit from ancient myths. Let's look at some more recent anomalous sightings that often get woven into this whole polar mystery narrative.
After Byrd's time.
Yeah, like in February 1950, just a few years after the supposed diary flight, United Press reported U.S. Navy icebreakers entering undiscovered waters in the Bellingshausen Sea near Antarctica.
Hinting at unexplored areas. Might seem minor, but
But for those following these theories, it fueled speculation. And then almost immediately after that report,
a wave of UFO sightings over Alaska and Canada in 1950.
right, so you have Navy finding new waters near a pole, then UFOs seen near the other pole.
And the connection gets made. Maybe these UFOs aren't from space. Maybe they're using these polar areas as entrances or exits from inside the Earth. The aliens might be neighbors, just hidden ones.
And then there's an incident that sounds particularly compelling, the Chilean Antarctic incident.
Ah, yes. 1955-56. Roberts Island.
Tell us about that. It involved a scientific team, right?
It did. The 10th Chilean Antarctic Expedition. Biologists, engineers, naval personnel. On January 9th, 1956, Dr. Celestino Castro spotted two motionless, cigar-shaped metallic objects hovering vertically over the island.
Cigar-shaped, not discs.
Cigar-shaped in this case. And what happened next, according to detailed reports, including from Chilean UFO researchers and even their Civil Aeronautics Directorate Study Group? It was extraordinary.
What did they do?
After 3 hours just hanging there, one object moved horizontally, then accelerated. Estimated at 40,000 kilometers per hour.
40,000. It's a Mach 30 plus.
Insane speed. And it stopped instantly, silent, then returned to its original spot. The maneuver implies impossible G-force resistance or maybe manipulating gravity itself. The second object did similar things.
Physics-defying stuff.
Completely. But here's what makes it really stand out. The scientific measurements.
They had instruments.
Yes, Geiger counters, scintillation counters, standard radiation detection gear. When the objects returned, the scintillation counter showed a 40-fold increase in background radiation.
40 times normal. That's dangerous.
Potentially life-threatening, it's sustained. And they estimated the size Dr. Motor used, cloud shadows, figuring about 150 meters long, 25 meters diameter. Huge.
Did they see any other details?
He used a polarizing spotlight, and shining it on one object made it seem to shrink, maybe some kind of cloaking or energy field effect. And Dr. Castro thought he saw a hatch on top.
So multiple credible witnesses, specific maneuvers, calculated speeds, size estimates, and measured environmental effects like radiation.
Exactly. That's why this incident is often described as more terrifying and more credible than many UFO reports. The empirical data points lend it significant weight, fuels the idea that something truly strange, maybe advanced, operates in those remote polar regions.
Now, let's bring in a totally different story, non-polar, but one that powerfully resonates with the hollow Earth idea, the account of George Weiss.
Just speleologist, right?
Yeah.
Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, 1954.
That's the one. He was exploring deep, fell into a crevice, got trapped, search parties failed, he was presumed dead.
But he came back, weeks later, unharmed.
With an incredible story. He claimed he was rescued by, well, tall, blonde, blue-eyed people, long fingers, completely silent.
Silent rescuers. Okay.
He said he woke up in what he called a primitive medical center, but his injured leg was miraculously healed. Advanced healing tech, maybe? The whole rescue was a blur.
Disorienting. And then
Then he describes this impossible landscape they led him into. A plain of gleaming flowers, snowy mountains far off, blue sky. But the sun was different.
How so?
Smaller, darker, reddish, or copper-colored, and no visible horizon, like being at the bottom of a great bowl. He said it was beautiful. You could look right at this weird sun without hurting your eyes.
Wow. The parallels to the Byrd diary descriptions?
Hmm.
They're striking.
Aren't they? Advanced, benevolent beings, this unearthly internal landscape.
And Weist himself couldn't make sense of it for years, right?
Not until he read Ray Palmer's Stuff in Flying Saucers about the Hollow Earth. It gave him a framework, a way to understand his otherwise inexplicable experience.
Which really highlights how these grand narratives can resonate with personal, bewildering events. People need explanations, and sometimes these theories provide one, however speculative. Speaks to that human need to make sense of the unknown.
And speaking of things that seem to offer proof, let's talk about that satellite photo, the ESA one from 1970.
The ESA-7 photo, November 23, 1968.
Right. It was part of a routine weather satellite mission. One image shows the North Pole covered in clouds. Pretty normal. But a second one, cloudless, seems to show this huge dark circle right at the pole. A hole.
A gaping hole where ice should be.
Exactly. And Ray Palmer
Palmer jumped all over it, predictably.
ran it in flying saucers.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
June 1970 issue, reprinted the photo prominently, claimed it was undeniable proof, confirmed the underground super race, the polar access points, everything he'd been saying.
So that image became a powerful visual anchor for the belief.
Hugely powerful. Seemed like photographic evidence, right?
Yeah.
To his followers, it was the smoking gun, a classic case of an ambiguous image being interpreted as definitive proof for a belief you already hold.
So let's step back and ask why. Why did these ideas, inner Earth, polar entrances, hidden civilizations inside our planet, why did they gain such traction, especially right after 1947?
Well, it boils down to that fundamental question that arose with all those UFO sightings back then.
Yeah.
Where were they coming from?
The two main theories emerged. Outer space.
Or inner Earth. Extraterrestrial versus intraterrestrial.
And why did the intraterrestrial idea appeal so much, especially to Palmer and his followers?
I think it offered a different kind of explanation. Maybe these aliens weren't so alien after all. Maybe they were right here, hidden. Some sources also point to the sheer variety of UFO shapes reported, not just discs, but triangles, cigars, cubes.
Right, like the Chilean incident cigars.
Exactly. That variety maybe suggested multiple sources, perhaps earthbound civilizations, rather than one single alien race visiting from the stars. It made the phenomenon feel more immediate, maybe more understandable in a weird way, closer to home.
And let's go back to the Master Ariani's message in Byrd's diary, the core reason for their intervention.
The atomic bombs.
Right, because humanity detonated the first atomic bombs, unleashing a power not for man. It's such a specific trigger point.
And that framing positions them as these concerned superior guardians, doesn't it? They're warning about the great storm, the dark ages, if we don't change. It serves as this powerful allegory for our own self-destructive path, especially in the nuclear age.
It implies they feel some moral imperative, a responsibility to stop us from destroying ourselves.
Yeah, it's that recurring theme. Higher beings trying to guide or warn a less evolved species.
Yeah.
Deeply rooted in mythology, but here it's infused with very real, very modern fears about technology outpacing wisdom.
The sources we looked at also touch on some darker conspiracy theories that build on all this, right? Hidden worlds, hidden powers.
Oh, yeah. Things get pretty conspiratorial. The idea that shadowy unified powers are setting up secret bases in Antarctica, maybe to exploit resources.
And that disturbing idea about people disappearing.
That millions vanishing each year aren't just missing, but are being taken, transported as a labor force to hidden underground colonies.
That's incredibly dark. Chilling.
It really raises the question, who benefits from all this secrecy? The narrative suggests these powerful hidden groups manipulating information, maybe even populations, for their own agendas.
Connects back to Byrd being silenced by the monstrous military-industrial complex.
Exactly. It paints this picture of a controlled reality, where inconvenient truths, hidden civilizations, advanced tech, maybe those Antarctic resources Byrd supposedly found, are ruthlessly suppressed to keep power consolidated. The disappearing labor force idea is a particularly grim extension of that mindset.
Okay, let's bring this back down to Earth, literally. What does established science say?
Well, modern geology is pretty clear. Based on overwhelming evidence, Earth is not hollow.
We know its structure pretty well now.
Extremely well. 4 main layers. The crust we live on, the thick solid mantle, the molten outer core, and the solid inner core.
And how do we know this so confidently?
Seismology, primarily. Think of earthquakes like giant taps on the planet. The sound waves, the seismic waves travel through the Earth.
And they behave differently depending on what they pass through.
Precisely. Solid rock, molten metal, empty space. They all affect the waves differently. Our global network of seismographs listens to these waves. If Earth were hollow, the patterns would be completely different. We'd see waves stopping, bouncing back in ways we simply don't observe.
The echoes confirm a solid, layered interior.
Unequivocally, thousands upon thousands of earthquakes paint the same consistent picture. The source mentions the Kola superdeep borehole briefly and some fringe theories about why it closed, but honestly, the seismic data is just overwhelming. Solid Earth.
And what about that ESA photo, the supposed hole at the North Pole?
The skeptical explanation is pretty straightforward, almost ridiculously simple, as one source put it.
An optical illusion.
It says essentially, yes, a type of atmospheric phenomenon common in polar regions, like a mirage, Earth's curvature, specific light and temperature conditions. They can create convincing visual distortions. Things can look closer, warped, or you can get effects that look like holes.
So not photographic proof of a gateway.
Very unlikely, according to standard atmospheric optics. And this raises that bigger question about perception, right? How easily we can misinterpret things, especially in extreme environments.
Like the shimmering city in the diary. Could that be an atmospheric effect too?
Possibly. Scientists talk about fata morgana mirages or complex light reflections on ice, creating things like ice blink or even rainbow cities, an avenue of frozen rainbows. Plausible explanations exist for strange visual phenomena.
And critically, the official version of Byrd's diary, the one historians generally accept.
Right, that one directly contradicts the lost diary. It states, Byrd observed no significant objects beyond the pole, only a vast white desert covering the horizon.
No green valleys, no mammoths.
No, which is a major piece of historical debunking for the sensational claims.
What about a psychological perspective? Could these extreme experiences be, well, influenced by the mind itself?
That's definitely another angle explored. The intense psychological pressures of polar exploration, the isolation, the sensory deprivation, the constant danger.
Could that lead to altered perceptions? Hallucinations?
It's known to happen. Extreme environments can profoundly affect mental states. The mind, under stress and lacking normal stimuli, can create vivid experiences, complex narratives. What one person interprets as a mystical encounter, another might see as a delusion brought on by extreme conditions.
So maybe the inner world was, in a way, an internal one.
It's a perspective that tries to rationalize these extraordinary accounts through the lens of human psychology, highlighting the mind's power under duress.
This all seems to circle back to a theme in some of the sources. Control. Controlled information, discrediting those who reveal too much.
Yeah, that idea that truth is relative, manipulated by powerful systems. That chilling line, freedom is self-determination. Today, no one can self-determine. Suggests a lack of real individual agency.
And the implied agenda behind this control.
Suppression. Suppressing inconvenient truths. About resources, maybe those Antarctic minerals Byrd supposedly found. Or advanced technologies, keeping things hidden to maintain power.
And the sources end with a pretty dark warning about this, don't they?
They do. The notion that those who shine too much, who reveal too much, might face consequences. Psychiatric observation being discredited.
And it even hints at the disputed circumstances around Byrd's death.
Yes, the alleged, though highly contested, suicide from a psychiatric hospital window. With that detail about a white figure supposedly seen before the fall. Whether true or not, it serves as this potent, macabre allegory about suppressing knowledge. A warning about challenging the powerful.
So, after digging through all this, what does it all mean for us trying to make sense of it today?
Well, we've journeyed through these incredible claims in Byrd's lost diary, right?
Yeah.
Contrasted them with his known history, with science.
And explored the wider world of hollow earth theories, myths, UFOs, all tangled together.
Which really forces you to ask about the nature of truth itself, doesn't it? Is the diary just a clever fabrication, an allegory, a hoax?
Does it contain fragments of something real, something astonishing, deliberately hidden?
It pushes you to confront your own assumptions. What do you want to believe? What does the evidence actually support?
But regardless of whether it's literally true or not, Byrd's story, tied up with the hollow earth myth, it clearly still resonates. It has power.
It absolutely does. It pushes us to question our assumptions about our planet, about the limits of our knowledge, about reality itself.
Makes you consider the possibility. Maybe there are things out there, or even in there, that we just don't understand yet.
Things that defy our current neat scientific boxes. It's a reminder that the world might still hold profound surprises if we're willing to look.
So the story of Byrd and the hollow Earth, it remains this potent symbol, doesn't it?
Of our endless curiosity, definitely. Our yearning for hidden knowledge, our fascination with the unknown, the unexplained.
Whether it's a coded message for peace, a mix of fact and fantasy, or a tale of suppressed truth.
It certainly gives you a lot to think about long after you stop listening. Speaks to our deepest fears and maybe our greatest hopes, too.
Perhaps that real land beyond the pole isn't geographical at all. Maybe it's the unexplored territory inside us, our own perception, capable of creating and questioning these incredible realities.
That's a fascinating thought to end on.
Well, we hope this deep dive has given you plenty to mull over, plenty to ponder, maybe sparked some new questions.
That's always the goal.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all, stay curious.